How's it going, Illuminati? Thank you guys so much for your support, as always. I hope I didn't dick anyone around too badly with the crazy scheduling today, but I was getting gold. I mean, it's just little bits, but it's like my second day doing it, and I probably pulled a good, day's wage out of the ground. So, assuming I get better at it, this is not even a good spot. It's actually a spot you shouldn't really, you're supposed to be on the inside of curves, and I'm on the outside, but I saw some iron oxidized and thought that might be good, and lo and behold. So at any rate, hella interesting week. I hope you guys had a chance to check out the physics girl video. I hope it made sense to everyone. It's really interesting for me to have the opportunity to sort of work almost entirely intuitively and apparently uncover things that are, that are confirmed by physics later. It is kind of a remarkable experience, and it's very encouraging. This whole idea of symmetry and synchronicity. The other thing about it, though, is I think it's all just very obvious. So, I don't really think there's anything particularly special in what I'm doing, or that I am a super genius or anything like that. It's just that when you don't have the conditioning, it's just obvious. A lot of this that seems so occulted. The obvious was hidden, as it says in the Grateful Dead song. So, where we were at before is this idea of karma, and the obvious problem with the fact that if it's a just and good God with just and good laws, then how is it, if karma is real, or even just that cause and effect is engineered in such a way that there's some sort of balance, some sort of fairness? Like, what kind of God would design a world that was, bereft of these things? And you notice that, like, Adolf Hitler, he would have to be burned alive 6 million times or whatever in order to compensate for his sins, so to speak. And, and then so we were able to kind of push a little bit with the ideas and to come up with some possibilities. Like, if there are the transmigration of souls, if that's correct, if reincarnation is real and true, then that could explain that Adolf Hitler is going to have a lot of miserable lives for a lot of lifetimes, and the person that makes that sacrifice to save a child and dies is going to live like Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead, who was like adopted by one of the wealthiest families in the United States, and then was in the Grateful Dead from the time he was 15 until the current juncture. I mean, maybe he did something in a previous life to get himself that magic carpet ride in this life. Some people, it's worth noting though, warn against this, that it's better to just maintain the middle way, because otherwise there's this up and down. Because regardless of your karma, you're still going to have to deal with the law of compensation, and the fact that as high as you rise, you must fall. And it's not necessarily a metric of how good or evil you are. It's just an experiential, or it's an experiential problem that's purely a product of the laws of the universe. So, if absolute justice requires immortality, it does not require anything impossible. The spirituality of the soul is the condition and necessary foundation of immortality. The law of merit and demerit, the direct demonstration of it. The first is the metaphysical, the second the moral proof. Add to these the tendency of the powers of the soul toward the infinite, and the principle of final causes and the proof of the immortality of the soul is complete. Now, I think we did read this last time, and I kind of noticed that that's kind of like creating a conclusion and then trying to make everything fit into it. He's saying, okay, so we know that God is just and good and fair, therefore the soul must be immortal in order to balance that. Well, no, we don't know that. You know, I mean, you can't start from that conclusion and then just say, oh, well, then that means all these things are true, because the first thing, there's no reason to believe that other than just Christian conditioning, or, you know, whatever the case is. But we'll forgive this and play devil's advocate, as it were, and push on. God, therefore, in the Masonic Creed is infinite truth, infinite beauty, and infinite goodness. He is the Holy of Holies, as author of the moral law, as the principle of liberty, of justice and of charity, dispenser of reward and punishment. Such a God is not an abstract God, but an intelligent and free person, who has made us in his image, from whom we receive the law that presides over our destiny, and whose judgment we await. It is his love that inspires us in our acts of charity. It is his justice that governs our justice, and that of society and the laws. We continually remind ourselves that he is infinite, because otherwise we should degrade his nature. But he would be for us as if he were not, and his infinite nature had not forms inherent in ourselves, the forms of our own reason and soul. When we love truth, justice, and nobility of soul, we should know that it is God we love underneath these special forms, and should unite them all into one great act of total piety. We should feel that we go in and out continually in the midst of the vast forces of the universe, which are only the forces of God, that in our studies, when we attain a truth, we confront the thought of God. When we learn the right, we learn the will of God, laid down as a rule of conduct for the universe. And when we feel disinterested love, we should know that we partake the feeling of the infinite God. Then, when we reverence the mighty cosmic force, it will not be a blind faith in an atheistic or pantheistic world, but the infinite God that we shall confront and feel and know. Then we shall be mindful of the mind of God, conscious of God's conscience, sensible of his sentiments, and our own existence will be in the infinite being of God. The world is a whole, which has its harmony, for a God who is one could make none but a complete and harmonious work. The harmony of the universe responds to the unity of God, as the indefinite quantity is the defective sign of the infinitude of God. To say that the universe is God is to admit the world only and deny God. Give it what name you please, it is atheism at bottom. On the other hand, to suppose that the universe is void of God and that he is wholly apart from it is an insupportable and almost impossible abstraction. To distinguish is not to separate. I distinguish but do not separate myself from my qualities and effects. So God is not the universe, although he is everywhere present in spirit and in truth. Now, I do detect some serious psychological gymnastics going on there, because one of the great tragedies of Christianity is that they separated divinity from the individual human man and made him a groveling, pathetic, unworthy sort of creature that was, desperately seeking the favor of this God who had created him apparently with all of these flaws. And, it's just that whole crazy bullshit Judeo-Christian fucking mindfuck that is just garbage. And then also to extract the divinity from the world. And so when, for example, the Europeans came to the New World, and they had these Native Americans saying, well, what do you mean that there's this one God and separate from everything? We are, one unified spirit, and the rock, the bison, the lobster, whatever, the rock lobster is all the great spirit incarnate. And and so of course the Europeans said, okay, well, that's blasphemy, we need to burn all you Indians, all all you savages alive. And that's what happens when you remove divinity from people. They become Christians, and they can burn other people alive and think that they're doing God's will, because the belief that divinity is separate from man has expelled divinity from their being and made them themselves the savages that they think they are destroying. And so, what he is saying here is that, well, obviously it's dumb to separate God from the universe, but it's also blasphemy for me to say that the universe is God, so therefore I have to do some kind of weird gymnastics in my mind to try to make both, possible. And I think it's just bullshit. He's just trying to cater to that Christian, and there's reason for it, because at these levels, before people hit the 33rd degree, they're still thinking that it's like a Christian civics organization. You know what I mean? And he has to be careful not to dissuade the early initiates from their determination to proceed in illumination by kind of force or suggesting things that are going to make them believe that it's blasphemy and that it's evil and stop their progress. So I think some of it is a deliberate accommodation of the expectations and beliefs that the initiates have upon entering into Freemasonry. And so, it's my opinion that he knows better. In fact, I know it for sure. But again, he's got to kind of do a little dance around the people that he's dealing with, their bullshit, basically. But so, I mean, look at how nonsensical it is. So God is not the universe, although he is everywhere present in spirit and in truth. I mean, God is not the universe, but everywhere present in spirit and truth. That means that he's the universe. So, you know what I mean? Like, there's just this sort of nonsense that is readily detectable as soon as these accommodations for Christian thinking enter into the picture. And that's another reason why, I am so adamant that this religion is just absolutely toxic, horrific garbage. Look what it does. It leaves in its wake, this sort of, it asserts this absolute requirement, necessity to have, an spiritual, to have like these false, these impediments to real growth are sort of intertwined into the substrate of the fucking thing. It's absolutely horrific and demonic. Well, that's cool. I don't know what the hell that is. To us, as to Plato, absolute truth is in God. It is God himself under one of his phases. In God, as their original, are the immutable principles of reality and cognizance. In him, things revive at once their existence and their intelligibility. It is by participating in the divine reason that our own reason possesses something of the absolute. Every judgment of reason envelops a necessary truth, and every necessary truth supposes the necessary existence. And that is, again, profoundly important. That's the fundamental basis for all of my thinking, and it is the only way to really be effective in any arena of thought, from the metaphysical and spiritual to the building of an empire. And, this is one of the reasons that initiates of Freemasonry and mystery school initiates were able to become so powerful, is that they engineered their protocols and their, they allowed these universal laws to inform the things that they built, right? So, the pyramid, for example, being one of the symbols of the mystery schools. It's because it's the most stable geometric shape. And so if you're going to erect a civilization, the pyramid is the obvious structure to follow when you're doing so. And this kind of throws some light upon the reality that it may not be so unnatural that 99% are at the bottom and 1% is at the top. Because if you don't want your structure to topple over, then you need to imitate nature and, use the most stable geometric shape when you're constructing your society. It may be argued that, we could maybe have a little bit more compassion or whatever it is, but just, being objective about it, that is the structure to use. And it also stands to reason that if the universe is doing things according to its own ingenium through mankind, then we're not necessarily consciously choosing these things even as much as we might think we are. The directive is coming from a deeper place, and the fact that 90% of our behavior is subconscious is pretty good support for the fact that it is really nature doing things through us, even when it seems completely unnatural. And also when our human nonsense gets in the way of our perception and clouds it, and we're unable to perceive the universe as it actually is, if we're able to reduce everything to an interplay of law, then we're able to attain to that level of objectivity, at least long enough to allow it to inform our perception so that we can have an objective take on what is happening, and then we have to recontextualize that back to like a human perspective. Thus, from every direction, from metaphysics, aesthetics, and morality above all, we rise to the same principle, the common center and ultimate foundation of all truth, all beauty, all good. The true, the beautiful, the good are but diverse revelations of one and the same being. Thus we reach the threshold of religion and are in communion with the great philosophies which all proclaim a God, and at the same time with the religions which cover the earth, and all repose on the sacred foundation of natural religion. Of that religion which reveals to us the natural light given to all men without the aid of a particular revelation. So long as philosophy does not arrive at religion, it is below all worships, even the most imperfect, for they at least give man a father, a witness, a consoler, and a judge. By religion, philosophy connects itself with humanity, which, from one end of the world to the other, aspires to God, believes in God, hopes in God. Philosophy contains in itself the common basis of all religious beliefs. It is, as it were, borrows from them their principle and returns to them surrounded with light, elevated above uncertainty, secure against all attack. And again, I think there's an awful lot of bullshit in this paragraph. I don't believe in worship. I don't see what the point of worship is. I don't even understand what it means. There's nothing to worship. There is nothing above us. There is nothing superior to us. There's nothing to be in servitude, or nothing has jurisdiction over you. No voice in your head can command you to do anything that is not consistent with your with what you know to be right. You know what I mean? Like, this is an example of just that old garbage from religion still, I think, existing in this person's consciousness. There are some things that are valuable, of course, because there always are, because what this represents to me is kind of a middle ground between the ultimately free consciousness. It's like 3/4 of the way up that ladder. There is still sort of have some of this residual crap from religions. I do to some extent. I have to occasionally find it and neutralize it. Because I'll notice, Judeo-Christian stuff kind of influencing me or causing me some guilt or, whatever it is. So we all have to be vigilant. But yeah, I mean, what he's basically saying is that when philosophy has some acknowledgement of divinity, then it has a special light. Then it's elevated above sort of, the mundane, and it's sort of superior to philosophies that don't. And that's absolutely true. But when he uses the word religion, I kind of, don't really like that. But, if we just kind of recontextualize this stuff a little bit, then it's perfect. We just have to take this idea of needing a father in heaven, and that religion is somehow beneficial to philosophy and all this crap. This is our job, to separate the wheat from the chaff and get rid of all that shit. From the necessity of his nature, the infinite being must create and preserve the finite, and to the finite must, in its forms, give and communicate of his own kind. We cannot conceive of any finite thing existing without God, the infinite basis and ground thereof, nor of God existing without something. God is the necessary logical condition of a world, its necessitating cause, a world, the necessary logical condition of God, his necessitated consequence. It is according to his infinite perfection to create and then to preserve and bless whatever he creates. That is the conclusion of modern metaphysical science. The stream of philosophy runs down from Aristotle to Hegel and breaks off with this conclusion. And then again recurs the ancient difficulty. If it be of his nature to create, if we cannot conceive of his existing alone without creating, without having created, then what he created was coexistent with himself. If he could exist an instant without creating, he could as well do so for a myriad of eternities. And so again comes around to us the old doctrine of a God, the soul of a universe, and coexistent with it. For what he created had a beginning, and however long since that creation occurred, an eternity had before elapsed. The difference between a beginning and no beginning is infinite. And so that might be a little bit confusing, and he's not dealing with it at all. But he's saying, if this being is perfect and eternal, at what point did it suddenly have a desire? When was its tranquility and repose suddenly interrupted? By what and for what purpose? What caused it to have discontent if it's forever perfect? If we'd speak of this creator having created, but when was the moment when this impetus to create began? And I think I might actually be able to resolve this a little bit better than he did, and that is the whole Phoenix process idea. If we have this quantum loop, this circumstance where the universe has a beginning that's not a beginning, which would be the case because of the paradoxical laws. Everything contains its contradiction. All of these things are true and false, and it's both true and false to say that they are true and false. You know what I mean? So it has a beginning, but it doesn't have a beginning. And that beginning is the singularity. And then when the universe fulfills all of its possibilities, it collapses back in on itself, and the singularity happens again. So now we can have an eternal act of creation and dissolution that has no beginning, and is really just a revolution of cycles. And the only beginningness is relative to our realm of creation, which is only one level out of an infinite level, or infinite levels. The difference between a beginning and no beginning is infinite. But of some things we can be certain. We are conscious of ourselves if not as substances, at least as powers to be, to do, and to suffer. We are conscious of ourselves not as self-originated at all, or as self-sustained alone, but only as dependent first for our existence, ever since for support. Among the primary ideas of consciousness that are inseparable from it, the atoms of self-consciousness, we find the idea of God. And see, there again, we have this contradiction with the idea that God is separate from its creation, because he literally just referred to people as atoms of self-consciousness in the idea of God. Carefully examined by the scrutinizing intellect, is the idea of God as infinite, perfectly powerful, wise, just, loving, holy, absolute being with no limitation. This made us, made all, sustains us, sustains all, made our body, not by a single act, but by a series of acts extending over a vast succession of years. For man's body is the resultant of all things created, made our spirit, our mind, conscience, affection, soul, will, appointed for each its natural mode of action, set each at its several aim. Thus, self-consciousness leads us to consciousness of God, and at last to consciousness of an infinite God. This is the highest evidence of our own existence, and is the highest evidence of his. But if there is a God at all, he must be omnipresent in space. Beyond the last stars he must be, as he is here. There can be no mote that peoples the sunbeams, no little cell of life that the microscope discovers in the seed spiral of a moss, but he is there. Again, he is in the moss, he's in the cell, he's in all these things, but he's not the universe. It's this massive contradiction that is only there in order to make space for Christian ideology, right? It's just such a pollutant. If you could just not have to make accommodations for that, this would be so much more powerful and concise. And it's just, I really hope we can get rid of religion forever sooner than later. it really just leaves this like stain on everything it contacts. He must be omnipresent in time. There is no second of time before the stars began to burn, but God was in that second. In the most distant nebulous spot in Orion's belt, in every one of the millions that people a square inch of limestone, God is alike present. He is in the smallest imaginable or even unimaginable portion of time, and in every second of its most vast and unimaginable volume, his here conterminous with the all of space, his now coeval with the all of time. Through all this space and all this time, his being extends, spread undivided, operates unspent. God in all his affinity, perfectly powerful, wise, just, loving, and holy, his being is an infinite activity, a creating, and so a giving of himself to the world. The world's being is a becoming, a being created and continued. It is so now and was so, incalculable and unimaginable millions of ages ago. And so I just realized something that, you know, of course, I mean, I was aware that this was a technique, but I just noticed it happening in the book there. So it's not so much that he is just like, you know, brainwashed himself and making accommodations for the Christian ideology. But you'll notice that he will make all these acknowledgments like, oh yeah, Jesus, Christianity, whatever. And then he'll sort of erode all that a little bit by saying that, well, okay, so God is separate from everything, but if he's infinite, then he would have to be in the cell and in the star and in all the moments in time. And so, and then he recedes a little bit and he goes, but, you know, Jesus, blah, 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 backs up. And then he erodes all of that crap a little bit further by saying, you know, he's got to be totally omnipresent in, you know what I mean? So that's an interesting thing to see, is how they kind of do that, to sort of push and then back up a little bit, and then it's just the same as when I wash the sand off of the black sand, and then eventually am able to bring the gold to the surface. And I guess that's just the sort of necessary process to undo all of this. You can't just do what I do and just confront it directly and grab the bull by the horns and kick it in the face. That's not going to work. When you do that, people are just triggered and they just, you know what I mean? They just shut you out, especially now that all it takes is a click. So perhaps I can take a lesson from that and use a little bit more subtlety and exhibit more patience in my eroding of the religious influence wherever I can destroy it. So thank you guys so much for your support. We'll see you guys again super soon. I think the videos are getting more and more interesting, and I'm sort of coming back to life over the last couple of months. My health is returning and more and more vigorous all the time. So hopefully we'll see a big rally in this community and start really getting something done.